Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize your neighborhood. Now pray for the soul of this explorer. It's time for 31 days of horror. Oh, hi there, Terence McGuana here. Welcome back to the 31 Days of Horror, where today we're going to look at 1979's Love at First Bite. Believe it or not, this is the very first iteration, believe it or not, but the very first version of Dracula I ever saw in my life was this film right here. Whenever people mention Dracula to me, it's not Bela Lugosi that comes to mind, it's not Christopher Lee, and it's certainly not Gary Oldman. The first image of Dracula that ever pops in my head is George Hamilton in Love at First Bite. So it's been about 20 odd years since I last watched this film, but there are so many things in it that I still remember to this day, and that is precisely why I chose this as part of the 31 Days of Horror. Let me give you a little synopsis of the story to this one. Count Dracula is kicked out of his castle by the Romanian government and makes his way to the Big Apple to pursue fashion model Cindy Sondheim, who he believes is the reincarnation of Mina Harker. When he is in New York City, he is pursued by Dr. Jeffrey Rosenberg, a long-lost descendant of Van Helsing. This film holds a special place in my heart as the first version of Count Dracula that I ever saw. In some of the mythology that I learned about this character, I managed to get from this particular film. Now, watching it again, I realise it is not that great a film. Even as a spoof comedy, a lot of the humour is quite weak, to be perfectly honest. One thing I really love about this film is George Hamilton's Bela Lugosi impersonation that he carries throughout this entire film. And he really has a terrific screen presence in this part. For me, this version of Dracula is so iconic. When I was a child, I was mesmerised by this version of Dracula, thinking that, you know, that this was the original Dracula. It wasn't until years later that I even discovered who Bela Lugosi was and that George Hamilton was sending him up here. This strikes me as one of those spoof movies where they're just two guys sitting in an office coming up with some silly jokes and just sort of spitballing different jokes to each other, and most of them don't land. Most of the jokes in this do not land, but there is a certain element of sort of fuzzy warmth, pleasantness to it that I really take to. It really does feel like a cheesy Halloween film that you would probably not. It would maybe be the appetizer to something more meaty later on, right? It's definitely one of those films that you would have on in the background as you were decorating your little Halloween den, right? Love at First Bite is perfect for that. But the thing about the humour in it, it is very kind of old school. There is a lot of sort of stuff that you would imagine seeing in old variety shows. A lot of the humour is kind of based on Count Dracula being out of step with the modern world, especially the late 1970s. And when he meets this character, Cindy Sondheim, who is the Mina Harker of the story, she's the long lost love that Dracula has been pursuing for hundreds of years. When he actually, I think probably the funniest thing about this film is when he finally gets to confront her and he's going to bring out his Transylvanian charm to hypnotise her into falling in love with Count Dracula. It is, she's just like, on you go. You know, she's such a free spirit. She's one of, she's obviously a child of the sexual revolution. Straight down the disco, smokes weed and drops a couple of quaaludes. She's just a party girl, this person. You could probably people would probably use some more derogatory terms as like, but I'm not going to sit here and run those off because I think that's just misogyny at play there. But this character, she is a free spirit, right? She sleeps around. She's quite happy to do that, and when she meets Count Dracula, she's just happy to get into bed with him. So that kind of diffuses any sort of sexual molestation from Dracula. I've always found in a lot of the other versions, the more serious ones, including the Francis Ford Coppola version of Dracula, that Dracula's a bit of a predator. To be honest, if he's going to use hypnosis to get a woman in the bed so they can drain her blood. What makes him any different from Bill Cosby? Not George Hamilton here. George Hamilton is sending this character up, and he does it with so much glee. That's the thing, I really enjoy every scene that he's in. Every scene that he appears as Count Dracula, and he really goes for it with the cheesy Bela Lugosi blah 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 accent. He's hilarious, but the standout for me is definitely Susan St. James. She gets some of the best lines in this film. You're either going to love it or you hate it, and I've got a real soft spot for this film. It's pure nostalgia for me. It does occasionally bring a wee smirk. It's a sort of light comedy, and there was one part in it that I thought was actually quite fascinating to the whole vampire mythology. And a few years ago I had a pretty poor attempt to try and write a vampire screenplay set in Glasgow, right? And this idea I thought was my idea, but it actually comes from Love at First Bite, where there's a scene in it where George Hamilton transforms into a bat, and it's like the cutest little bat that you've ever seen in a film. It's the most unthreatening thing, and the effects are terrible. But he turns into this bat, and he flies over to this drunk, this sort of wino in an alleyway, and he drinks his blood as a bat, right? And later on, he comes staggering back to his coffin, and he's drunk off his ass in this scene. And that must have been stuck in my subconscious, because I always thought that would be an interesting idea. That what if a vampire drank the blood of someone who consumed, I don't know, say they took cocaine, for example. Say this person was high on cocaine. Would that mean that the vampire would get to, by proxy, get high off cocaine? And I think it came from this movie. I think this movie had stuck in my subconscious that a vampire could, in fact, enjoy getting high on drugs or tasting sweet food and things like that because of the person that's consumed it. Weird. And I like that. I think it was quite well played. I mean, it is one of those kind of films that you would just imagine it was on. It is kind of like an overlong comedy sketch that's dragged out. But you know, it's just a breezy wee film that you know, if you want to see some sort of goofy, cheesy horror comedy stuff, this is the one. And there are some really funny moments, but they are quite few and far between, to be honest. But it was really interesting to see how, you know, the female lead took charge sexually. She took complete charge, whereas Dracula's supposed to be this massive control freak, isn't he? He hypnotises women. He is completely in control of Mina Harker and Sadie Frost's character in the Francis Ford Coppola version. But in this one, it was great to just have that completely taken away from Dracula. That the woman is just like, yeah, let's go and have sex. She just wants to have sex with Dracula, you know, and she's quite happy to have sex with Dracula. She's not in love with him. She's just, you know, she's just a free spirit, you know. She's just quite happy to sleep around, you know. She just sees that's her kind of life. She's a 70s woman, and I thought that was quite interesting and quite funny. It was such a funny sort of role reversal for the sort of battle of the sexes. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to subscribe to the channel, hit the subscription button. If you want to get updates, then ring that wee silly bell. And I'll see you tomorrow. Peace, love, rock and roll. Cheery bye.